as you're getting your drink, some of you, like I said, we first put the coffee shop in our plans. We had met with our architect and I had him draw this in the middle of the campus. And like I said, sure enough, some people said, why in the world does a church need a coffee shop? And I said, first of all, it's the beer of Baptists. That's what I told them. And Baptists love their coffee, they need that. But then I tried to explain, no, it's a connecting place. But not everyone understood that part of the story. And so when finances looked tight, like too tight to build the campus, the coffee shop drawings got pulled out of the master plans. And even going into our last capital campaign, we needed $400,000 to break ground, but the coffee shop was gonna be an additional $250,000. So we took it out of the plans because everyone said, we can never raise more than $400,000. We've never come close to that before. We only had like 300 people meeting in a school gymnasium here in town. So we ran the campaign. And you know what? People did not commit to $400,000. They gave $650,000. Exactly, yes, let's applaud that. Thank you very much for all the Old Time Grove people. And it was exactly what we needed above the 400 to build a coffee shop. So I said, the coffee shop is back in the plans. I think God likes coffee. That's the point there. And so we've had that on our campus. And more seriously, it's a living metaphor, I think, of this biblical value of living in community. Because if you think about it, coffee is a connecting drink. Coffee is a socializing drink. We meet people over coffee, don't we? We tell our stories over coffee. Coffee has a way of opening people up, and they start to talk about their troubles and their fears, but then we also start to talk about our dreams over coffee. And in many ways, coffee is more than just a beverage. I think it's a community experience. It really is like that. And so here's where I want to start this morning. I want to start with this idea that when you read Scripture, you can't help but see that God made you for community. God made all of us to live in community. What do I mean by that? Let me share the grounding for this idea of community that is Christian. First of all, we see community in the Trinity itself, because for eternity, for an infinite number of years, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit have been living in community. And then we read in Genesis that God invites you and me to come in and join him in, and join the Trinity in community. And then when God empowers a nation, he just doesn't empower a solitary person named Abraham. He said, Abraham, I need you to build a nation with 12 tribes. And we see this tribal value come out through the tribes of Israel. And then Jesus comes along. And Jesus is a relational revolutionary. And for the first time, we see with him and his 12 followers how good it is to follow God with a crowd of friends. And Jesus was always inviting his friends to join in following God with him. He would say, come and pray with me. He'd say, come hike a mountain with me. Come fishing with me. Or he would say, come take a walk with me on the water, things like that. And his friends would join in with him, but that's what it was like. I think the best picture of community, though, comes in Acts chapter 2, and that will be our text in just a minute this morning. In Acts chapter 2, we see what the new church, the New Testament church, looks like. You had had these people from all different places and countries. They used to be Jews and Romans and Greeks and foreigners and immigrants. And now they come together as one people, as a community of Christ followers. That's what we see here. Julie Gorman, who writes on community, she writes this: whatever system God touches has the marks of relationship on it. Whether humankind, the nation of Israel, salvation, or the church, in this relational imprint bears both dimensions of being in relationship with God and being in relationship with others. If you have your Bibles, open up to Acts. And like I said, our text is Acts chapter 2. And I'm going to start reading in verse 42. And we read of these new believers, this new tribe of Christians. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer, and everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common, and they sold their property and possessions and gave to anyone who had need. And every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. If you go back up to the first line in verse 42, the writer of Acts, Luke, uses this really rich word. It's Greek. In English, it's translated here in the TNIV as fellowship. But fellowship in Greek, the word is koinonia. Koinonia is a very weighted word. Koinonia means to participate. Koinonia means to collaborate. Koinonia carries this sense of oneness and unity. I think the best English word to talk about koinonia is the word community, because that says it all. And that's what we're invited into when we read about the New Testament church. Today, as I use this word community, now understand I'm talking about community that is Christian. There's all kinds of community that you can have in life. Some of it matters kind of, some of it doesn't matter at all. For example, I've heard there's associations like the Association of Renaissance Martial Artists. That's not the community we're talking about today. There's the Cloud Appreciation Society. We're not talking about them. Or the Mustache Club of Clareton College. Or the Society for Pet Obesity Prevention. Those are all communities, I'm sure. But I don't know if they're worth a whole lot. Today, when I use the phrase community, I'm talking about community that is Christian, for Christ's followers. I have this key idea that I hope sticks with you as we talk this morning. Christian community is God's answer to aloneness. Life gets really hard when we try to do it on our own. We do better when we're together, sharing, caring, learning, growing, encouraging, and loving just like Christ. That's what it means. That's what you're invited into. So why does God insist this is the best way to live? I want to start here. I want to say first that as we read this passage, I'm convinced that we thrive in community. We thrive when we're in relationship. Sometimes doctors will use the phrase FTT, or the acronym, if a baby is not doing well. By the way, let me show you this clip of two babies, and let's see what happens here. All right, we can hold it there. All right, that either really stressed you out or brought back some amazing memories, but there was just someone joined in. All right, that's great. So now, I know babies when they're first born are supposed to cry, but if they keep crying, or if they don't cry at all, the doctor comes along and on the infant's chart will write FTT, failure to thrive is what that means. But look what happens when these two twins who had been pulled apart at birth, look what the doctors and nurses do next.
Any goiter stool for baby A?
That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Where's the little guy I just spent 9 months with? He's gone. Some of you, when you're alone at home, you may be 38 years old, but you're on the couch in a fetal position doing that, aren't you? Where are all my friends? So we read in Acts 40, chapter 2, go back to verse 46. We read what this New Testament community is thriving, in my opinion. Every day they met together, they broke bread, they ate together, they had glad and sincere hearts, they were praising God, they were enjoying the company of each other, and God added to their numbers every day. It's a healthy, thriving community. I think it's clear that God made you with a relational component. I know that spiritually, I know that you have a cognitive component. I know there's a physical component, but God made you to live, to follow him in relationship with others. And when we do that, we do better. That's when we thrive as Christians, not alone. Dr. Larry Crabb, who writes on community in his book, Connecting, one of my favorite authors on the subject, writes this: when two people connect, Something is poured out of one and into the other that has the power to heal the soul of its deepest wounds. I think that we as people, we feel stronger when we're together, aren't we? In so many ways. Yes, even physically, at least guys do. And this isn't the point of this morning, but I think guys, like when Jesus is with his 12 disciples, for guys, there's something empowering about that. For example, like this afternoon, if you were to go into Buffalo Wild Wings with your posse of 12 friends and you sat down, I mean, you could cheer for the Rams and nobody's gonna mean mug you. You know, you could do whatever you want. But because you're with your entourage and your bros, people just back away. At least guys feel physically stronger when they're with their friends. Better than that, I think we're emotionally stronger when we're in community. If you think about it, when you're alone and isolated and lonely, you feel very weak, you feel unwanted, you feel unloved. But when you have people around you pouring into your life, you feel stronger, you feel wanted, you feel healthy. And maybe most importantly, when you do life in community that is Christian, you feel spiritually stronger. I think sin is less appealing when you have people around you that care about you. In isolation, I think we get tempted easily. We get pulled back into sins that we have, that we thought we could have walked away from. But when you have people around you lifting you up, saying, you can do this. You don't have to give in to that. You're better than that. You're stronger than that. Then all of a sudden we feel empowered spiritually. And sin loses its appeal. That's what happens there. As I said, I think we're stronger when we're together. In verse 45, there's this great line about how the early church, this connecting church, they sold all their possessions on offer up and let go. And then they shared that with everyone around them, shared ridiculously, generously. And I think sometimes as Western Christians, we don't understand that value of embracing and sharing everything in community. Growing up in Liberia, and most of you know I grew up in Liberia, West Africa, and our home was deep in the rainforest. A single-engine prop plane had to drop us off. It was so remote. I grew up among the Sapo tribe of Liberia. And I saw quickly, even as a kid, that the tribe shares everything. For example, if you are going to build a house, a mud hut, then the whole tribe stops for the day and the tribe builds a mud hut with you. If you're going to cut your farm and plant, then the whole tribe comes to cut your farm and make farm and plant it with you. If your infant is sick, then the whole tribe's baby is sick. If your son is going to leave for high school in the city, then your son will go hut to hut and will sit down with every family in the village and they'll say, your son is leaving for school. Can you help pay my school bill? Because your son is everyone's son. And I realized it wasn't until our house burned down that my family had been accepted as part of the tribe. I didn't know that until then because obviously, as Americans, it seemed like maybe we had everything. But then our house burned down, and everything we owned burned down with it. Well, the day our house burned down, I remember watching a Sapo tribal girl take off her shoes and put them on my sister's feet. She had run out of the house barefoot. Later that day, a woman from the tribe came and found my mother, and she had brand new bed sheets still in the plastic. Where would you get that? The next morning, we went to church, and one of the women came out of the choir, sat next to my mother, and took off her wristwatch and put it on my mother's wrist, her most valuable possession. And then after church that day, another lady took my mother to her mud hut, and then she went up in the little rafters, pulled down a box of her most valuable possessions, and took out a nightgown, a brand new nightgown, and gave it to my mother. The tribe shares everything. And then a young pastor by the name of William Carmplay, he came and found my mother and my father, and he said, your house is burned down. He said, I want to invite your family to come to my town. It's on the beach. I think your family would like it on the beach. And he was right. And so My mother said, but William, she said, William, all our possessions have burned. I don't have the cots that we take with us when we travel. I don't have the thermoses to take boiled water in. And my kids don't even really have enough clothes. And I certainly don't even have any food left to bring with me. And William said this. He said, Mother, they called my mother Mother. He said, Mother, he said, we are human beings too. If you come, we will take care of you. And so my parents said, okay. And we made the journey, and it was far to where his town was on the beach. And we got there when it was dark, and we went to bed. And I remember clearly waking up the next morning, and I smelled something, and it smelled ravishing. I was like, what is that? And then I saw his wife walk into the room where we're all staying. It was a beautiful place they prepared for us. And she has a big tray. And on the tray, she has some hot water and then a jar of Sanka for my parents. Some of you know what Sanka is. She had some Sanka there. And then she had a can of Ovaltine for me and my twin brother and my sister. And then next to it on the tray was a heaping pile of piping hot donuts. I was like, donuts? I had never seen a donut in Africa. I didn't even know they knew what a donut was in Africa. And she had dipped them in granulated sugar, and they were amazing. And we ate donuts every morning while we were on the beach, and it was the best ever. My point isn't donuts are good. My point is, in the tribe, you take care of each other. And it's the same in Christian community. We're better when we do this life together, when we share everything, when we meet the needs of each other, just like this Acts 2 church. Let's go back to our text. In verse 46, we read this, that every day they continued to meet together. And then we read they ate together, and they spent time meeting together. But it's just a simple line, every day they continue to meet together. And we can skip over that, but I don't want you to miss that, in my opinion, God gives us Christian community as his answer to the trouble of loneliness in our world. I think there are a lot of people, individuals, even couples, sometimes families, that experience loneliness. And I think God gives us community as his cure for that. In Acts 2, we get this great picture of what it's like to do life together. We read that these new believers are praying together and worshiping together and learning together, but now they're eating meals together. And we read in one translation, they're having coffee together. I just made that up, but it's very possible. It could have happened. But everything they're doing together. You can follow God alone. Don't miss that. Don't mistake what I'm saying. You can, for example, decide to skip a Sunday morning here and stay home and make banana pancakes for your family and then watch ESPN Red Zone all day. You can do that. And then Monday morning, you can turn on the Grove podcast and listen to it on your drive to work. You can try to do that. But it's not the same. It's not the same as worshiping together and praying together and meeting friends and starting to do life together. Some say that the words lonely, alone, and loneliness are the three biggest words in the English language, because they're words about the soul. They're kind of like the words hunger and thirst are to the body. Without food and water, you're not going to survive too long. For the soul, if you are lonely and alone for too long, you don't do well. We start to spiral quickly. We thrive as human beings in the company of others, especially other people who are following Jesus Christ with us. Isolation, C.S. Lewis says, is like living in hell. That's how he says it. In his book, The Screw Tape Letters, he writes about this bus that's making its way through hell, kind of giving a tour of hell. And he starts to describe what the people on the bus see, and he says that they see the houses in hell. And the windows in the houses of hell, he says, are dark. People are alone and lonely there. And then he describes it like this. He says, and the houses are far apart. There's a lot of loneliness without God, without people who follow God, Christ with you. When you read the psalmist David, though, he paints a different picture. In Psalm 122, he says this. He writes about Zion, and he says this about Jerusalem. He says, in Jerusalem, he said, the houses are closely packed together and there are crowds of people. And life is so much better when it's like that. My point is this, is that community is God's cure for aloneness and loneliness. And so give yourself to it, dive into it. We read this next in verse 42, that every day, and moving down verse 46, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts and in their homes. You can't miss here that these New Testament Christians had a connecting place, a place to come together. I think having a place to connect with others, it's important. Even the New Testament Christians had that. Charles Schultz, 35 years ago, he saw that this was a need in our country. He says that he saw that America had lost its front porch. We had lost our main street, our city plazas, our town squares, and our cafes and diners. And so Howard Schultz said, I want to build a coffee shop called Starbucks, where people can come together and lounge and linger. He says this, I want it to be the front porch that America had lost. And in many ways, we want to do that here at the Grove. That's one of the reasons we have a coffee house, so that any day, every day of the week, you can meet friends and linger and lounge and spend time with people who care about you. The thing is, though, not every church gets this. Not every church understands this. I know that because I've been to them. I was in Charlotte a while ago with a friend of mine, Mark, and he takes me to his church, and we're running late, and we're hurrying through the courtyard, but I see a coffee station. It's one of those percolators, and I'm like, Mark, I need my fix. I need some coffee, and so we stop. I know it's gonna be bad because it's coming out of one of those silver old school percolators, but I need it anyway. And so I fill a cup, and then he says, okay, we gotta go, and we're rushing into the auditorium, and just when we're about to go through the auditorium doors, there's two ushers standing there, or we should call them bouncers. And they said, stop, sir, you cannot enter. I was like, why? They said, well, you have a coffee in your hand. I go, and what's wrong with that? They said, well, you might spill it on the carpet. And I was like, I'm all hopped up needing my coffee. I'm a nervous wreck right now, but I'm not gonna spill it on your coffee. They says, no, you either have to drink it or throw it away. I said, well, I can't drink it. It's scalding hot. And they said, well, sorry, you can't come in with a coffee in your hands. So I had to throw it away. So I came back, and when we were designing this space, we put in all kinds of bistro tables and coffee tables and dining room tables to encourage coffee drinking. Because coffee really is a connecting drink. It pulls people together. Not everybody gets that. But we wanted a place here at the Grove where people slow down and we're not in a hurry. And I hope you see why I say I think having a coffee house is a living metaphor for our community value, because coffee really does have a way of slowing us down. I think fast food, for example, is a bad metaphor. That doesn't work, because if you go to eat fast food, that's the whole goal. We'll give you your cheap, bad food in a hurry, and then can you please scarf it down and get out of here so we can hose down our bright plastic furniture for the next customer. But you can't drink coffee in a hurry. You'll scald your throat and you won't be able to talk for a week. You have to sip it slowly. And it's true like that in life. You can't hear someone's story in a hurry. You can't connect in a hurry. You can't listen to someone's trouble or heartache in a hurry. You can't share your dreams in a hurry. It takes time. That's why I think coffee is a good metaphor. In town here, we also have Dutch bros. My sons wanted to make sure I say Dutch bros and not Dutch brothers. They said that'll age me if I do that. So it's Dutch bros. I love going to Dutch bros because their baristas they're called broistas. They're all hopped up on caffeine and sugar. Their drinks are highly loaded with sugar. And when you get there, they seem to not stop talking. They're always engaging in conversation. And then I realized recently, I read an article about Dutch bros, and it says that their broistas are instructed that from the moment a customer comes up to the window, they are to engage them in conversation until the customer chooses to leave. And so I thought they just liked me there, all right? I thought, hey, this is an awesome guy. We're gonna talk to him for a while. We wanna hear about his day. Because they say, what are you doing today? How's your week going? I mean, all kinds of things. it felt good. But they're taught that. And the founder of Dutch Bros says this. He says, we're not in the coffee business. We're in the people business. Man, there's something biblical there. And that's what we're trying to do in one small way with our own coffee shop. I shared this story when it happened a year or so ago, but I need to share it again. In Vancouver, Washington, there's a Dutch Bros with a young 19-year-old broista working there by the name of Pierce Dunn. And he was working in the morning when a young woman in her late 20s, he says, pulled up to the window. And he leaned out the window to take her coffee order, but he saw that she was just weeping, crying, weeping. And so instead of asking her what kind of coffee she wanted, he said, what's wrong? And she looked up and she said, my husband died last night. I don't know how, but he could tell it was a really rough morning for her. So Pierce Dunn called the other broistas around, and here's a picture of them. They leaned out the window, and they held her hand, and they prayed with her. Pierce Dunn is a Christ follower, and he pulls his brothers together to pray for her. My point in sharing that is that I get to see that so often in our own Grove Coffee, and our baristas get to see that every week. And I've seen our baristas stopping their coffee serving to pray with people. And I get to see women mentoring younger women. I get to see guys mentoring younger guys. I get to see men and women meeting there for Bible study and devotions, and to build each other up and just to have a place to pray together. I see that happening. And that's why I say that everybody needs a connecting place. And that's one of the reasons we have a coffee shop on our campus. I want to end with this challenge, and it's this, that maybe you've been here at the Grove for a few months or a few years or a few weeks, and you've been on the fringes. My final challenge this morning is to pour into community. And yes, the pun is intended. But I invite you to pour into community. There's this short, simple line in verse 42 where the passage starts. They devoted themselves. And we can just stop there. These new followers of Christ devoted themselves to community. And maybe you've been staying on the fringes. Maybe you've been hesitant to dive in it. And I want to say, no, it's time to devote yourself to community here. You won't thrive as a follower of Christ until you choose to do that. 11 years ago, when Paul Gunther first got here, I told him we need to do a preaching series on this idea of community, where everyone needs to be committed to the idea and dive in. And I said, I need a series title. So he says, I have it, Palmer. I used to be in marketing. I said, well, what's the sermon title? He says, let's go with All In. I was like, All In? That sounds amazing. He even shows me a picture of a kid jumping off a dock, doing a cannonball. All In. I said, Paul, I have a banner made, a big banner that says All In. And so we do that. We put it up in the school gym that we're meeting in. And that first Sunday, people come, and I preach my heart out on being all in Christian community. I must have said all in 50 times that morning. And afterwards, I have this sweet woman come up, and she says, Palmer, so do you know that all in is a gambling phrase? And I was like, this is going to sound glib and ignorant, but it's the honest truth. We had just moved back from Malawi, Africa. I'd been there for 3 years. And I had never heard the phrase all in. And she starts to tell me, oh yeah, it's Texas Hold'em, Palmer. I said, what's Texas? I didn't know what Texas Hold'em was. She says, yeah, it's on ESPN2. You can watch it. I said, but poker's not a sport. She said, it's a sport now. And so all in. So I find Paul Gunther, and I said, Paul, do you know this whole sermon series, this banner, it's a gambling phrase. He says, well, everybody knows that, Palmer. I was like, then why'd you let us name it that? He said, well, Palmer, you said you liked it. I said, I couldn't win. But I think Paul is right. The invitation to you is to get off of the edge, come away from the fringes, out of the shadows, and give yourself to community here that is Christian. Otherwise, you just won't grow and thrive as a follower of Jesus Christ like he meant for you to. Marcus Barth says this about community. Yours is the invitation. Do it now. Pay any price. Spare no pain. You are to do it. I mean it. And at the end of this passage in Acts 2, the last line is this. And people were being saved, and God was adding to their number. I'll say this about community. Don't forget this. In my opinion, community is life-giving. And so when you walk around our campus, I hope you remember this, that community is life-giving. I think when I look out at our playground here for kids, we didn't just build a playground. I think we built a life ground. And down there, we don't just have a softball field. In my opinion, it's a life ball field. And we didn't build a boardwalk through the trees. It's a life walk through the trees. And we just don't have a coffee house. We could call it a life house. Community that is Christian brings life. If you've been on the fringes, if you've been holding back, God put you here with a purpose and for a reason. So dive in and do life with us here. That's your invitation today.